Alyamide was a village seemingly untouched by time, a place where the red earth of the land met dense forests whose trees whispered secrets in the wind. Sacred rivers threaded through the village like veins, carrying life, memory, and an unspoken reverence for the ancestors who had walked the soil long before any of the villagers. Each morning, the mist rose from the rivers and wrapped the huts in a silver haze, and at night, the fireflies danced in the darkness, like tiny sparks of ancestral guidance illuminating the edges of the forest. The villagers believed that the forest and rivers were not merely natural features but living witnesses, silent keepers of truth and balance. Among their oldest beliefs was one both revered and feared, that some children were born as children of insight, gifted with the uncanny ability to see beyond appearances, to perceive the hidden thoughts, motives, and secrets of those around them. Such children were often seen as blessings by some and harbingers of danger by others. It was in this village that Aoife had grown, a girl whose presence seemed to stir the still air with quiet awareness. At 23, she carried herself with a mixture of confidence and humility that drew attention even without seeking it. Her black eyes were sharp, always observant, as if she could read the intentions of anyone she met with a glance alone. She moved through the village with a subtle grace, helping elders with chores, guiding children to safer paths near the river, and offering insight to anyone brave enough to ask. Yet it was not merely her kindness or intelligence that set her apart. It was the way she seemed to know things before they happened, the way her words often predicted events, or unveiled truths that had been whispered behind closed doors. The villagers sometimes whispered among themselves, "She sees what is hidden," and they would glance toward her with a mixture of awe and unease, unsure whether to revere her gift or fear it. Her family, however, did not share this awe. Stepmother Adama, her eyes always calculating, had never hidden her disdain. Every act of kindness Aoife performed seemed to inflame her jealousy. Every hint of insight she displayed stirred deep anxiety. Adama feared what she did not understand, and worse, she feared the respect Aoife earned among the elders. Stepbrother Kofi, spoiled and arrogant, resented the quiet authority Aoife commanded, particularly when villagers sought her counsel over his own. And Beo, her father, though gentle in demeanor, was weak in spirit, often swayed by Adama's words and the manipulations whispered to him in the quiet hours of the night. They saw Aoife not as a daughter but as a threat, a living reminder of a prophecy that had shadowed the household since her birth. The prophecy had been whispered at the moment of her birth by the village diviner, whose voice trembled with certainty as he spoke. The child who sees beyond faces will return when replaced, and the secrets she uncovers will shake the world she left behind. To most it was a cryptic riddle meant for reflection and awe. To her family it was a warning. They feared the day she might rise against them, expose their secrets, or wield her insight in ways that could humiliate or dominate them. Every subtle movement she made, every knowing glance she cast, became a source of tension, a spark that could ignite their collective fear. Yet despite the mistrust and fear that surrounded her, Aoife remained steadfast. She approached her life with curiosity, keen observation, and careful patience. She noted the patterns in the villagers' behavior, the subtle cues in her family's expressions, and the hidden truths in whispered conversations. Her ability to perceive more than others made her a natural observer of the human condition, a quiet force that would eventually alter the course of her village, though she could not yet know how. Alyamide itself seemed alive with anticipation, as if the forests, rivers, and earth themselves recognized the presence of the child of insight. The birds in the trees seemed to pause when she walked by, and the wind carried her steps softly through the alleys and paths. Villagers often felt an invisible weight of awareness when she entered a space, a subtle shift in the energy around them that made them both alert and uneasy. Aoife was not simply living in Alyamide, she was entwined with it, part of the unseen rhythm of the land, a presence both natural and extraordinary. Even as the village carried on with its daily rhythms, women pounding millet at dawn, children racing along riverbanks, elders holding council beneath the baobab, there was a quiet tension surrounding Aoife's family. Each day the prophecy's shadow stretched a little further, infiltrating their thoughts, feeding suspicions, and amplifying their insecurities. They feared not just her insight but the inevitability of her return should they attempt to erase or replace her. And so the stage was set, the calm before the storm as Alyamide continued its cycles of life, and the child of promise waited, unknowingly, for the moment that would test the bonds of family, village, and destiny itself. Aoife's gift had revealed itself in small, almost imperceptible ways at first, subtle threads woven into the fabric of daily life that most villagers either overlooked or dismissed as coincidence. She would notice the faint scent of rain long before clouds appeared, her eyes catching the distant shimmer of humidity rising over the red earth, signaling the coming storm. She would warn the farmers and they would prepare their crops, saving them from ruin while others scrambled under the sudden downpour. Villagers began to speak of her as one whose senses were sharper than any elders, whose intuition reached beyond the ordinary limits of human perception. But her gift extended far beyond natural phenomena. Aoife could sense the faintest signs of illness in children and adults alike, an irregular pulse, a subtle pallor in the skin or a slight tremor in a hand. Mothers would bring their sick infants to her, believing she could foresee the onset of fever, and she often guided them to the proper herbs or rituals that prevented the illness from taking hold. Occasionally she would speak a warning before a disease spread, her words carrying weight because of the precision with which she predicted outcomes. In the village, some admired her as a blessing, a young woman whose presence brought order and safety, while others feared her uncanny insight, whispering that her eyes saw too much, that she carried knowledge that should remain hidden. Her family, however, responded not with admiration but with trepidation. Adama's whispers were poisonous and relentless. She leaned toward Bayo one evening, her voice low but sharp as the shadows stretched across their hut. "A girl who sees all will see your shame, Bayo," she said, her gaze flicking toward Aoife with a mixture of contempt and fear. "You cannot let her rise. Do you understand? If she learns the truth of what we've done or what we hide, there will be no place for us. No respect, no honor, only ruin." Her words slithered through the household like a venomous wind, planting seeds of paranoia in Bayo's otherwise gentle heart. Kofi, ever eager to prove himself and appease his mother, began watching Aoife with a calculating eye, noting her every movement, every interaction. Adama's constant urgings ensured that even Bayo's occasional moments of kindness toward Aoife were tainted with suspicion. The family began subtle plotting, masking their intentions behind ordinary gestures and seemingly casual decisions. They discussed ways to reduce her influence in the village without appearing cruel, thinking to replace her with someone malleable, a servant girl or distant cousin who could mimic her presence and gain the villagers' trust. Their conversations were filled with careful measurements of words, planning each step to ensure that Aoife's brilliance would be quietly erased while the household maintained its outward appearance of normalcy. Aoife, for her part, noticed the growing coldness in her family. Dinners were quieter, conversations that had once been light-hearted carried an edge, as if she had unknowingly crossed an invisible line. Even the warm smiles she once received from her father were fleeting, replaced by hesitant glances and brief, distracted nods. Despite this, she remained observant and composed, refusing to let fear dictate her actions. She continued her daily routines, helping villagers, tending to the sick, and moving through her home with quiet dignity. Her intelligence and sensitivity allowed her to detect the hidden motives behind words, the subtle shifts in tone, the barely perceptible hesitation that betrayed someone's intent. She began noting the patterns of behavior in her family, their secretive glances, whispered conversations, and unusual absences. While others might have been frightened or paralyzed by such awareness, Aoife's approach was methodical. She listened carefully, stored observations in her mind, and waited for the right moment to act, or simply to understand the full scope of the situation. At the same time, her actions reinforced the villagers' divided perception of her. The elders who had once been cautious now sought her counsel, impressed by her knowledge of herbs, the weather, and hidden motives in disputes. Children and their parents admired her gentleness and foresight. Yet others, seeing her influence growing, began to murmur warnings behind cupped hands and closed doors. "She sees what should remain unseen," some would say. "Do not provoke her, or she may uncover truths you are not ready to face." Even amid the whispers and tension, Aoife's loyalty and kindness remained unshaken. She did not retaliate against those who feared her, nor did she attempt to dominate or manipulate those around her. Her cleverness was tempered by patience, her perception balanced by empathy. She understood that power without wisdom was dangerous and that patience and quiet observation could often achieve more than rash action. The household tension reached its peak one evening as the wind howled through the village, bending the sacred rivers into silver arcs of reflection. Adama's whispered urgings had grown more insistent, her fear now almost palpable. Kofi fidgeted nervously, glancing at Aoife as she moved through the hut with ease, unaware of the plotting around her. Even Bayo, torn between his love for his daughter and his fear of Adama's warnings, found himself hesitating, caught between loyalty and insecurity. Aoife, sensing the shift in atmosphere, stood silently in the firelight, her gaze calm but penetrating. The subtle glimmers of her gift had made her aware of the storm within her household before anyone dared speak it aloud. She understood that her family might attempt to erase her influence, perhaps even her presence, and yet she remained composed, a quiet force of intelligence, loyalty, and awareness, ready for whatever challenge the growing suspicion might bring. By the time night fell over Alumide, Aoife's presence in the village had become more than that of a young woman with insight. She had become a silent observer, a careful guardian of truth, and a figure whose gifts, while feared by some, could not be ignored. The seeds of envy, fear, and plotting had been sown in her household, but Aoife's patience, cleverness, and unwavering loyalty would serve as her shield, preparing her for the trials that lay ahead. The day Zuri arrived, a strange unease settled over Alumide. She appeared on the path that led from the forest to the village, a young woman in her early 20s, carrying herself with an air of practiced confidence and a smile that seemed carefully measured. Her dress, though simple, was embroidered with patterns unfamiliar to the villagers, hinting at distant lands or wealth beyond what was customary in Alumide. She introduced herself as a distant relative, sent by kin from afar to assist the household, or, according to another version of her story, as a gifted servant brought to aid in the family's duties. She spoke with a voice both melodic and deliberate, carefully modulating her tone to appear both humble and capable. Aoife watched her arrival with quiet attention, sensing the subtle tension in the air. Her instincts, honed over years of observing human behavior, immediately detected that something was off. Zuri's movements were precise, too deliberate, and her eyes flickered in ways that suggested calculation rather than openness. When Zuri bowed to the elders, her posture seemed rehearsed. When she smiled at children, her warmth felt borrowed, lacking the natural ease Aoife herself embodied. Even the way she held her hands, resting lightly but controlled at her sides, sent a chill through Aoife's perception, an aura of artifice cloaked in practiced charm. Inside the household, the arrival of Zuri was greeted with eagerness, particularly from Adama, who saw in her a tool, a potential replacement for the child of insight she had long feared. "See, Bayo," Adama whispered with barely concealed triumph as they watched Aoife greet Zuri politely, "someone who can take her place, someone more manageable, more obedient. Our burdens will be lighter." Bayo, torn between his innate kindness toward his daughter and his fear of Adama's manipulations, hesitated, caught between relief and guilt. Kofi's eyes gleamed with opportunism, already imagining the ways in which he might manipulate Zuri to maintain his own standing while sidelining Aoife. Word of Zuri's arrival spread quickly through Alumide, carried by the curious and the cautious alike. Villagers gathered near the edges of the household compound, whispering questions and doubts. Some were intrigued, curious to meet the newcomer and see if she truly bore any gifts or knowledge that would benefit the village. Others were skeptical, uneasy at the thought of a stranger being welcomed so readily into a household already shrouded in tension. Rumors began to circulate immediately. Is she really a relative or something else entirely? Why now when Aoife is here guiding and protecting us? Can she truly replace the girl who sees beyond faces? Aoife, undeterred by the murmurs, observed Zuri closely. Every story the stranger told contained subtle inconsistencies, small gaps that her intuition immediately recognized. Zuri spoke of distant relatives who supposedly sent her, yet could not name them with certainty. She claimed to understand the village customs, yet mispronounced sacred terms and stumbled over rituals that had been passed down for generations. Each slip, each calculated charm, revealed to Aoife the hidden truth beneath the veneer. This was not someone sent by kin or fate, but an agent of deceit, carefully planted to supplant her presence and weaken the household's respect for her. As the days passed, the tension in the village grew. Aoife noticed the way her family treated Zuri with approval, praising her efforts and subtly undermining Aoife's role in everyday affairs. Adama spoke of Zuri's efficiency in tasks that Aoife had long mastered, exaggerating minor mistakes and framing them as signs of Aoife's diminishing relevance. Kofi flitted between servility toward Zuri and veiled hostility toward Aoife, attempting to create a rift between the two women. Even Bayo, wishing to avoid conflict, began deferring to Zuri in small decisions, which only deepened Aoife's awareness of the insidious nature of the plot against her. The villagers, sensing the undercurrents of tension, began dividing into factions. Some remained loyal to Aoife, quietly seeking her guidance in matters of health, weather, and counsel. Others, seduced by Zuri's polished demeanor or influenced by her family's insistence, began giving her attention and praise, unsure whether to trust the girl they had known since childhood or the newcomer who claimed to be her equal, or her replacement. The uncertainty created a palpable strain in Alumide, a tension that hung like a storm cloud waiting to break. Through it all, Aoife remained calm, patient, and calculating. She observed every glance, every whispered word, every subtle movement, cataloging the information she would need to counter the plot that threatened her. She recognized that confrontation would require careful timing, strategic exposure of the truth, and the guidance of her intuition. The forest, rivers, and ancestors seemed to watch with her, their presence a silent reassurance that she was not alone in navigating this deception. Aoife's awareness of the growing determination in her family to erase her presence strengthened her resolve. She realized that Zuri was not merely a visitor, but a deliberate attempt to diminish her influence, to displace her and manipulate the village into accepting a false narrative. And as she stood at the edge of her home one evening, watching Zuri mingle with villagers under the fading light, Aoife felt the first stirrings of a plan, a quiet, calculated response that would expose the lies, reclaim her place, and reveal the secrets her family and the stranger feared most. Late one night, while the village slept under the heavy cloak of darkness, Aoife lay awake in the quiet of her room, the shadows of the hut stretching long and wavering in the flickering firelight. She had sensed the tension lingering in the house for days, an invisible current of scheming and unease that prickled at her skin. Tonight, her intuition whispered that something more sinister was unfolding, and she could not ignore it. Quietly, she slipped to the edge of the doorway, listening, her breath shallow, her senses alert to every creak and whisper that traveled through the still night air. Through the thin walls of the adjoining room, she heard the low, deliberate tones of her stepmother, Adama, speaking in hushed urgency. The words, intended for secrecy, came with an intensity that only confirmed Aoife's suspicions. Adama was not merely planning to undermine her influence, she was orchestrating a complete erasure of Aoife from the village's awareness. Beside her, Zuri's soft replies hinted at agreement, her voice measured but complicit, carrying the precision of someone who had been carefully coached for this moment. "You must understand," Adama said, her voice like a knife wrapped in velvet, "the villagers cannot know the truth of her gifts, not yet. If they see her, if they sense her power, they will rally behind her instead of you. We must convince them she has gone, that she has disappeared, perhaps even that she has died. Only then can Zuri take her place unchallenged." Aoife's heart sank, but her mind sharpened. Every word revealed a layer of deception, a meticulous plan designed to manipulate the perceptions of the villagers. Adama continued, outlining subtleties of the scheme, staged absences, moments where Aoife could appear to vanish without explanation, whispers sown among neighbors and carefully constructed tales to explain her absence. Each piece was calculated, meant to isolate Aoife, undermine her reputation, and make the villagers believe that the girl they trusted and admired had been replaced or erased from their lives. Zuri's voice, quieter yet no less resolute, confirmed her role in the plan. "I will step in where she is missing," she said. "I will guide the villagers, answer their questions, and ensure no suspicion falls upon me. They will accept me because the story will leave no room for doubt. By the time they notice, it will be too late for her to reclaim her place." The weight of betrayal pressed upon Aoife. Her family, the people she had once trusted implicitly, were not only conspiring against her, they were attempting to rewrite the reality of her existence. The thought was bitter and sharp, cutting deeper than any visible wound. She had given them loyalty, respect, and love, and yet their fear and jealousy had transformed those bonds into instruments of deceit. The realization stung, but it did not paralyze her. Rather, it ignited a quiet determination. Aoife stepped back into the shadows, allowing her presence to remain unseen. She replayed every detail in her mind, observing the plan with careful attention. Each aspect of the scheme, every potential manipulation, offered insight into her family's weaknesses, their assumptions, and the precise ways in which they expected her to falter. Her intuition, already finely tuned, guided her through the complex web of deceit. She recognized the openings, the moments where subtle counteractions could disrupt their narrative, and the points where patience and timing would become her most powerful allies. In the silence of her room, Aoife began to formulate her own strategies. She would not confront them openly, not yet, but she would observe, gather evidence, and act with precision when the moment demanded it. Her perception of the villagers, her understanding of human motives, and her ability to sense truths hidden beneath the surface became her shield. She would use the very cunning they sought to use against her, turning it into her advantage. By the first light of dawn, Aoife had resolved to resist quietly and intelligently, to navigate the treacherous currents swirling around her household without revealing her awareness prematurely. The whispers of betrayal had not broken her, they had sharpened her. She had been betrayed, yes, but she had not been defeated. And in the stillness of the early morning, as the first mist rose from the sacred rivers and touched the edges of Alyamide, Aoife knew that she would meet deception with insight, manipulation with awareness, and betrayal with unwavering resolve. The plan began to take shape in the quiet corners of the household, whispered between walls and shadowed doorways where Aoife's ears could not yet reach. Adama, ever meticulous and cunning, enlisted Kofi and Zuri to carry out her scheme. Kofi, eager to prove himself and win his mother's approval, agreed without hesitation, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of participating in a plot that would elevate his standing while diminishing his sister. Zuri, calm and composed, nodded with practiced serenity, concealing any trace of discomfort or moral conflict behind the serene mask she had cultivated since her arrival. Their scheme was as intricate as it was cruel. Adama's instructions were precise. Aoife was to be lured away from the village under the guise of a simple errand or a need to assist with distant chores. Once she was deep in the forest, where the shadows of ancient trees stretched like fingers and the sacred rivers whispered past hidden roots, Kofi and Zuri were to trap her, isolating her from all who might come to her aid. The family believed that by keeping Aoife hidden in a remote, uninhabited area, they could manipulate the villagers into accepting Zuri as the rightful presence in the household. Slowly, subtly, the villagers' trust would shift from Aoife to the newcomer, and by the time Aoife returned, it would be too late. Her influence, her reputation, and her rightful place would have been erased. Aoife, keenly aware of human nature and finely attuned to the subtleties of behavior, noticed the small but significant changes in her home. Meals were delayed or withheld under flimsy pretenses. Kofi and Zuri exchanged glances that lasted too long, their expressions carrying a language she understood well, one of coordination and conspiracy. Even her father, Beo, seemed distracted, his gaze avoiding hers more often than not, his soft words tinged with uncertainty. Adama, meanwhile, moved through the household with a controlled urgency, giving whispered instructions to Zuri, adjusting schedules, and ensuring that every moment would be orchestrated to facilitate their plan. The tension within the walls of the house became almost unbearable. Every interaction was charged with an unspoken threat. Every smile and gesture carried the weight of hidden motives. Aoife observed the patterns carefully, reading the silent communication between Zuri and Kofi, noting the fleeting hesitations in her father's voice, and the cold precision in her stepmother's movements. She catalogued each detail mentally, understanding the larger design that her family sought to impose. As the days passed, the household's atmosphere grew heavier. Conversations that once held warmth now carried an edge of caution and control. Zuri was increasingly included in tasks and decisions that had traditionally been Aoife's, and with each step, the family worked to normalize the idea of her presence in the villagers' eyes. It was subtle, manipulative, and deliberate, a slow erosion of Aoife's place in the world she had long known. Aoife's instincts, sharpened by both intelligence and intuition, told her that the moment for confrontation was approaching. She felt the currents of deceit swirling around her, the calculated strategies designed to isolate and replace her. Yet she did not react with panic or rashness. Instead, she prepared herself, quietly observing and planning, understanding that knowledge was her greatest weapon. She noted the safest paths through the village, the hidden nooks in the forest, and the ways in which she could use her perception to navigate the traps her family was setting. There was a mounting sense of inevitability in the air, like the distant rumble of a storm gathering over the sacred rivers. Aoife could feel it in the subtle shifts of the household's rhythm, in the careful timing of meals and messages, and in the silent coordination of her stepmother, stepbrother, and Zuri. Each act, each omission, was part of a larger design meant to ensnare her. Yet the more deliberate the plotting, the more clarity Aoife gained. The tension, instead of crushing her, honed her awareness and steeled her resolve. By the time the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across Alyamide, Aoife had prepared herself for what was coming. She understood the full scope of the deception, the intricate methods her family would employ to remove her from the village, and the dangers that lay hidden in the forest beyond. Though her heart ached with the weight of betrayal, her mind was clear. She would not be a passive participant in their scheme. Every movement, every decision, and every observation would be guided by the careful application of her gift, her intelligence, and her intuition. The forest awaited, silent and dark, promising both danger and opportunity. Aoife knew the plan had been set in motion, that the trap would soon close around her, and that the villagers' perception of reality was on the verge of manipulation. And yet she also knew that she was not powerless. With each subtle shift in the household, each whispered instruction she overheard, Aoife's resolve strengthened. The confrontation was inevitable, but she would meet it on her own terms, using the awareness and cunning that had always been her greatest allies. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky with streaks of gold and amber, when Ife was called to the edge of the village. Her stepmother, Adama, had sent a whispered message through Zuri, claiming that a ritual required her presence, or that rare herbs necessary for the household's well-being had been found deeper in the forest. Ife, trusting the duty she had always carried and unaware of the full trap, stepped lightly along the worn path, her senses alert to the rhythm of the village stirring behind her. Birds called from the canopies, leaves rustled beneath her feet, and the sacred rivers murmured in the distance, their water reflecting the first fragile light of dawn. As she moved deeper into the forest, the familiar comfort of nature began to twist. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, and the undergrowth seemed to close around her, guiding her toward the hidden clearing where Zuri and Kofi waited. When she reached the designated spot, the subtle tension in the air became undeniable. Kofi stepped from behind a thick tree, blocking her path, while Zuri emerged from the shadows, her expression calm but calculating. "You shouldn't have come alone," Kofi said, his voice a mix of triumph and caution. "It's best for everyone if you simply stay here, away from the village." Ife's heart quickened, but she did not panic. Years of observing human behavior had honed her reflexes and sharpened her mind. She assessed her surroundings, the uneven terrain, the loose roots, the hidden spaces between trees where she could slip unseen. The forest, which had always been a sanctuary, now transformed into a labyrinth of potential danger and opportunity. Zuri moved closer, her hands outstretched as if to guide Ife, but the gesture was a calculated pretense. "We only want what's best for the family," she said, her voice smooth, "and for the village. You've grown too influential, Ife. Your absence will make room for peace." Ife's intuition screamed the truth. This was no act of care, but a trap designed to erase her from the lives she had nurtured. Her pulse surged as she considered her options. A misstep could lead to capture, isolation, and perhaps permanent removal from the village. But she had never relied solely on trust. Her intelligence and observation were her allies. As Kofi lunged, Ife twisted her body with agile precision, sidestepping him and using a low-hanging branch to propel herself forward. The forest floor, thick with roots and leaves, provided both obstacle and cover, each step calculated to obscure her movement. Zuri pursued, moving with careful rhythm, but Ife anticipated every motion, predicting her opponent's trajectory as one might follow a thread through a labyrinth. The struggle was brief but intense. Ife's breath came in controlled bursts, her mind cataloging every sound, the snapping of twigs, the rustle of leaves, the faint shift of soil beneath her pursuer's feet. In a narrow crevice between two ancient trees, she found a temporary refuge, pressing herself against the rough bark as Zuri's shadow passed overhead. Kofi, frustrated and cautious, circled, but the forest itself seemed to aid her, funneling their movements in predictable patterns. When she finally emerged into a wider clearing, the enormity of her family's betrayal hit her with full force. Those she had trusted implicitly, those she had loved and obeyed, had orchestrated her capture. The realization burned in her chest, yet it also ignited a fierce determination. She would survive. She would navigate this treacherous landscape. And she would return not merely to reclaim her place, but to expose the truth of the deception that had sought to erase her. The forest, once only a place of life and growth, became a dual symbol, both refuge and prison. Here she would hide, observe, and plan. Every tree, every shadow, every rustle of leaves became part of her strategy. She would live through this night of betrayal and emerge stronger, guided by the instincts that had always set her apart. The whispers of the wind and the murmur of the sacred rivers seemed to offer encouragement, reminding her that though the village may have turned against her, she was not without allies in the unseen. With measured steps, Ife moved deeper into the forest, her mind already weaving the threads of her survival and the path that would one day lead her back, not as the passive victim of deceit, but as the agent of revelation and truth. Deep within the forest, where sunlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy, Ife stumbled upon a clearing she had never seen before. Moss-covered stones formed a circle worn smooth by centuries of ritual, and at its center lay an altar, small but intricately carved, depicting the faces of those long gone. The air was heavy with the scent of earth, incense and age, an atmosphere that seemed both sacred and alive. As Ife stepped closer, her fingers brushing against the cold stone, a shiver ran through her spine. She felt it immediately, this place was not abandoned. A hush fell over the clearing, the sounds of the forest muted as if nature itself had leaned in to listen. Then came a voice not carried through the air, but felt deep within her consciousness. It was gentle, resonant, and ancient. "Child of insight, you have come," it said. We have waited for you. Aoife fell to her knees, reverence and awe flooding her senses. She recognized the energy of the ancestors, the spirits of those who had walked the village paths long before her birth. Their presence was both comforting and commanding. They had watched her growth, observed the injustices and fears surrounding her, and now they spoke to guide her. You are at a crossroads, the spirits continued, their voices weaving together like a chorus of whispers. Your family has sought to remove you, to silence your gifts. Yet your path is not ended, for the truths you hold are powerful beyond measure. Listen and learn, for knowledge is the tool of the wise and the shield of the vigilant. Through their guidance, Aoife began to understand the full depth of her family's deceit. Her stepmother, Adama, had long conspired not only to erase her influence but to bend the village to her own will, using fear and manipulation. Kofi, blinded by ambition and desire for approval, had become a pawn, while her father, Beo, though weak, had been manipulated into complicity through guilt and misplaced loyalty. Zuri, the supposed replacement, was no innocent newcomer. She had alliances of her own, connected to outsiders who sought to exploit the village's trust and Aoife's absence for their gain. The ancestors revealed the patterns of betrayal, tracing connections through generations and uncovering old grudges that had influenced the present. Aoife saw with startling clarity the motives behind every whisper, every hesitation, every orchestrated act meant to diminish her presence. She realized that to reclaim her place she would need not only courage but strategy, patience, and the ability to read both the hearts of the living and the intentions that hid behind false faces. As the revelations unfolded, Aoife felt a transformation within her. Fear, though present, was tempered by understanding. Hurt was tempered by purpose. The spirits imparted lessons in human nature, how jealousy twists love, how ambition corrupts loyalty, and how deception, no matter how well constructed, always leaves traces for those who watch carefully. With this knowledge, Aoife rose from the shrine, her gaze steady, her resolve firm. She understood the challenges ahead, the confrontation with her family, the exposure of Zuri, and the restoration of her rightful place in the village. The forest, which had first seemed a prison, had become a sanctuary of wisdom. The ancestors' guidance illuminated her path, equipping her with insight, clarity, and the courage to face the trials her family and the outsider had set before her. In that quiet, sacred clearing, Aoife whispered a promise to herself and the unseen voices around her. She would not be erased, she would not be silenced, and she would reclaim what was hers, not through force alone, but through the truth that only those who truly see can wield. Days passed in the forest, and Aoife moved with careful steps, attuned to every rustle of leaves and shift in the wind. The ancestors' guidance had sharpened her perception, teaching her to notice patterns others overlooked. She observed Zuri from the shadows, noting the way she interacted with the villagers, the subtle gestures that betrayed her unfamiliarity with customs, and the slight missteps that no true member of Alyamide would commit. Each detail, each hesitation, each inconsistency became a clue, slowly painting a picture of Zuri's true identity. Aoife recalled every past encounter with Zuri, the casual questions about the village, the knowledge she feigned, the way she hesitated when asked about long-standing traditions, and the glimmer of calculation behind her polite smile. Nothing had been as it seemed. The pieces fit together with the precision of a puzzle, revealing a deeper, more dangerous truth. Zuri was not a harmless outsider or a distant relative sent to assist. She was a spy, sent by a rival village whose leaders had long coveted Alyamide's resources, its sacred rivers, and the influence of those with insight like Aoife. The spirits whispered guidance, pointing out the significance of past events. They reminded Aoife of the times Zuri had steered conversations away from certain topics, of the questions she asked that seemed innocent but were designed to uncover weaknesses, and of the brief moments she lingered near important artifacts, subtly testing the boundaries of her trust. Look beyond the words, Binta's voice said, resonant and calm. The truth is always in the movement, the hesitation, and the shadow. As Aoife pieced together the strands of Zuri's deception, she also discovered the spy's vulnerabilities. Zuri relied on secrecy, manipulation, and the villagers' willingness to believe the convenient narrative of a replacement. Her power diminished when faced with scrutiny, exposure, and careful observation. Aoife realized that brute force would not be necessary. Patience, intelligence, and strategic action would be her weapons. The forest had become both her refuge and her classroom, teaching her to read not only faces and words but intentions hidden beneath layers of performance. With the clarity granted by the spirits and her own acute perception, Aoife began devising a plan. She would return to the village at the precise moment when Zuri's network of lies was most vulnerable. She would expose the deception for all to see, revealing Zuri's true motives, the complicity of those who aided her, and the secrets her family had sought to bury. Every move would be calculated, designed to maximize impact while minimizing risk. Her return would not be a confrontation born of anger but a revelation born of insight and timing. Ife rehearsed the sequence in her mind: the approach through the familiar paths, the observation points where villagers might gather, and the cues that would allow her to reveal Zuri's duplicity in a way that could not be denied. She considered the villagers' expectations, their trust in her, and the latent respect they held for the child of insight. This knowledge, combined with the lessons of human nature imparted by the spirits, became the blueprint for her return. The forest seemed to acknowledge her resolve. Leaves whispered softly in the breeze, shadows shifted to provide cover, and even the sacred rivers seemed to hum encouragement. Ife felt a surge of power, not of strength alone but of understanding, clarity, and preparedness. She was no longer merely reacting. She was orchestrating, anticipating, and positioning herself to reclaim what had been taken and reveal what had been hidden. In the quiet moments before her departure, Ife paused at the shrine that had guided her, pressing her hands to the ancient stones. "I will return," she whispered, her voice steady and determined. "Not as the child who vanished but as the one who sees and knows. The truth will follow me, and those who sought to hide it will no longer escape it." The ancestors' voices murmured in agreement, carrying a promise of support and vigilance. The path back to Alyamide stretched before her, fraught with danger but illuminated by foresight. Ife's heart, once heavy with betrayal and fear, now pulsed with certainty. Her return was inevitable, and when it came, it would carry the weight of revelation, exposing the hidden motives and lies that had sought to replace her. The village, the forest, and the spirits themselves would witness her reclamation, guided by insight, intelligence, and the quiet but unyielding power of truth. The forest opened before Ife like a curtain being drawn, the familiar paths guiding her back toward Alyamide, yet each step carried a sense of transformation. Her body was streaked with soil, her clothes marked from the journey through underbrush and roots, but her posture was upright, her gaze steady and alert. The village lay ahead, seemingly unchanged, yet to Ife, everything had shifted: the angles of houses, the rhythm of daily life, the subtle tension in the air. She had returned not merely as the girl who had vanished, but as someone armed with knowledge, insight, and the clarity of truth. At first, she moved cautiously, weaving between the shadows of trees at the edge of the village. Her presence went unnoticed, blending with the morning mist and the quiet hum of activity. Villagers went about their routines, carrying baskets, tending fires, and exchanging greetings, unaware that the girl they had assumed replaced or lost was observing from just beyond the familiar thresholds. She noted every glance, every hesitant smile, and every moment of hesitation from the household that had conspired against her. Ife's eyes fell on the family home. Zuri moved within, performing tasks with careful composure, yet the natural ease of belonging eluded her. The villagers who had interacted with her displayed subtle confusion, questions unspoken, glances exchanged, the sense that something was not quite right. Ife's stepmother, Adama, hurried through the courtyard, her composure forced, her movements deliberate, trying to erase the cracks that Ife's absence had revealed. Kofi lingered nearby, watching the villagers, attempting to measure their reactions, yet even he could not mask his unease. Ife did not step forward immediately. She allowed herself to be invisible, observing the dynamics she had known so well, noting how Zuri answered questions with rehearsed lines, how she mispronounced names or hesitated at references only Ife would naturally know. The villagers' trust in her, or rather the absence of trust in Zuri, began to surface in small, questioning gestures. A tilt of the head, a whisper to a neighbor, the flicker of doubt in the eyes of the elders. Her presence alone began to shift the balance. Even without a word, Ife's aura, shaped by intelligence, experience, and the quiet power of those who see clearly, created tension. The villagers sensed something familiar, something truthful that had been missing. She moved with patience, letting their suspicions grow, letting the inconsistencies speak before she spoke, allowing the truth to gather momentum on its own. When she finally stepped fully into view, emerging from the shadows at the edge of the household, the effect was immediate. The villagers froze, some gasping, some whispering hurriedly, others simply staring in disbelief. The girl they had assumed replaced, lost, or forgotten stood before them, familiar yet transformed, marked by experience and determination. Her eyes scanned the crowd with calm precision, noting who observed openly and who tried to conceal their reactions. Ife allowed herself a small, knowing smile, letting the weight of her presence speak louder than any words. Her return had already begun to unravel the narrative that Zuri and the family had constructed. Doubt rippled through the crowd as they compared what they had been told with what they now saw. The tension in the household tightened. Adama's forced composure wavered, Kofi shifted uneasily, and Zuri's practiced demeanor began to falter under the silent scrutiny of the villagers. Every observation, every calculated step, every silent moment worked to build suspense. Ife's patience became a weapon, and the villagers, once complicit in ignoring inconsistencies, now leaned into the unfolding truth. She did not need to speak yet. The discrepancies in behavior, the unnatural interactions, and the subtle signs of deception amplified in her presence. The stage was set, and the final confrontation where truth would be revealed, was inevitable. The courtyard fell into a tense, almost sacred silence. Ife stepped forward, each movement deliberate, her eyes scanning the crowd as if seeking permission from the unseen ancestors who had guided her through the forest and the trials of betrayal. She raised her head, letting the weight of the moment settle over everyone present. The villagers leaned in, sensing that the moment of truth, the revelation they had long awaited, was at hand. Her voice, soft at first, barely above a whisper, carried an unnatural resonance, a vibration that seemed to echo beyond the walls of the village houses. "I heard everything you said," she began, her words deliberate, each syllable measured. "Every plan, every deceit, every lie told in the shadows and behind closed doors." The family stiffened, Adama's fingers curling around the hem of her skirt, Kofi's jaw tight, Beo trembling under the weight of recognition. Zuri's pale composure faltered, her eyes darting to the crowd as if seeking an escape that did not exist. Ife continued, her voice now steady, clear, carrying authority that transcended mere words. "You, Adama, whispered envy at every compliment, sowing fear where there should have been trust. You plotted to remove me, to erase my presence so your jealousy could thrive unchecked. Every manipulation, every instruction to Zuri, every false claim you made, nothing escaped my notice. Nothing remained hidden." Adama's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. She recoiled slightly, the color draining from her face. Kofi's hands shook visibly, his earlier attempts at control evaporating under the unrelenting clarity of Ife's words. Ife's gaze shifted to her father. "Beo," she said, her voice softer but no less piercing, "your silence was your complicity. You allowed fear to govern you, letting the lies spread, letting the plot form under your very roof. Your weakness gave them power, yet your conscience could not speak, even as the truth awaited you in the shadows." Beo's lips quivered, his hands lifting as if to reach for her, yet the shame and recognition held him rigid. The villagers began whispering among themselves, murmurs of shock and relief mingling in the air, a symphony of collective realization. Then she turned her attention to Zuri, her voice sharpening. "And you," Ife said, each word deliberate and cutting, "came as a stranger, pretending to belong, pretending to be who you are not. Every question you asked, every story you told, every smile you forced was a mask to uncover weakness, to manipulate trust. You sought to replace me, to claim my place, and to serve those who would see my village bend to their will." The crowd gasped, the whispers rising to audible reactions. Villagers leaned forward, astonished and fearful, yet also gratified that the child of insight had returned to reveal the truth. Ife's voice grew stronger, more commanding yet calm, controlled and deliberate. "Every action, every word, every plot designed to remove truth from this village has been seen, recorded, and remembered. No denial can withstand what has been witnessed. No lie can hide when it is carried by the weight of knowledge, guided by those who have watched, who have whispered, and who have protected what is sacred." Adama's shoulders slumped, the pretense of control utterly shattered. Kofi's face turned pale, and he swayed slightly, finally realizing the consequences of his cowardice. Beo's eyes filled with tears, shame etched into every line of his face. Zuri's composure crumbled entirely, the mask of civility falling away to reveal the fear and panic of a deceiver caught. The villagers now stood in silent awe, shock rippling through the crowd, but also a sense of relief and vindication. They had suspected, they had questioned, and now they witnessed the undeniable power of truth, articulated and amplified by Ife's calm, precise recounting. Every denial, every attempt at rationalization from the family collapsed, leaving only the stark reality of betrayal, manipulation, and deception laid bare for all to see. Ife's final words, low yet resonant, echoed across the courtyard. "The secrets you buried, the lies you wove, the truth you tried to silence, all have returned. Justice is not mine alone but the village's." And now the truth stands before you. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with realization, yet liberating. The whispers of the ancestors seemed to linger in the air, amplifying the clarity of her revelation, ensuring that nothing would ever again conceal the darkness her family had attempted to hide.